My message to folks is very simple. I'm a proven leader under difficult circumstances working for inclusive economic growth, and I'm going to be the champion that makes this economy work for all people.
One of the divides in this race is between people who define themselves by wanting to fight with the other side and those who want to reconcile. What is the episode that happened in the last couple of days with former Vice President Biden? Does that tell you that the reconciliation side of this argument is the short side?
Well, I don't necessarily subscribe to the premise that there's fighters and reconcilers. I can't. Radical love.
And
yet you and I both know that it was radical love that showed some of the fiercest fighting during the civil rights movement. They didn't bring bigger hoses and bigger dogs to beat Bull Connor, but they fought him with a toughness and a grit, unarmed truth, unyielding love that transformed our nation. And that's how bullies and demagogues have always been beaten. I don't think we're going to beat Donald Trump using his tactics on his turf, but they called to the moral imagination of a country and transformed it.
But there are some constituencies that some people in your party think you love a little bit too much. That's why I raised that question. Pharma, home state industry, Wall Street, Silicon Valley. Is that a problem for you?
Well, I think it's a problem if people have a very shallow analysis of my history. I have spent half my life now living in some of the lowest income communities of our country. I love Newark, New Jersey, and we don't confuse wealth with worth. And the whole world I see really is a lens through those communities that have been left out and left aside. And so if you look at my record on pharma, God, I'm on every single bill.
Mm-hmm.
I've authored bills with people like Bernie Sanders to take down these awful prices.
When you got to the Senate, you were part of a small group of Democrats who opposed the drug importation resolution.
That's how these things spin on the internet. A lot of people try to point to a late night messaging, non-binding amendment that I voted against.
You think that was a meaningless vote?
It was an amendment that even if it passed, it would have had no change in law, nothing at all. It was a messaging amendment, but it didn't have the language I wanted, so I went and actually wrote a real piece of legislation, got Senator Sanders to work with me to do something about it. Some nonprofit looked at who voted where on Wall Street issues, and they said 0% of times that I vote for Wall Street interests that were trying to do things like undermine common sense regulations. I'm a person that is in this to fight for low-income Americans. We've stripped the dignity from work. We've undermined our capitalist system to now make it a system that benefits overwhelmingly not shared growth and shared prosperity, but more and more concentrations of power. We're using that power to undermine our politics in Washington.
Speaking of concentrations of power, Mark Zuckerberg gave you several $100 million for school initiative that you had when you were in Newark. Is somebody like Mark Zuckerberg part of the problem or part of the solution?
Well, I want to take a step back because I think America, I hope they know this story, which is as a mayor who had no control over my schools, a school system undertaken by the state. And I was one of those mayors that said, I'm taking responsibility. I may not have legal authority, but I'm going to find bold ways to create transformative change. He was an extraordinarily impactful philanthropist in our city because that gave us a lot of momentum to make change. Now, Facebook is really problematic. They're doing things that all of us in America, we just saw a Mueller report that pointed to how foreign adversaries were using platforms like Facebook.
But you're not willing to say Facebook should be broken up?
I'm willing to say that we need to look at tech companies in general because we have a problem in this country with corporate concentrations of power that are undermining basic free market, basic democratic ideals. And so if I am the leader of this country, which I hope I am, I'm going to be coming after hard these large monopolistic companies.
But the fact that Zuckerberg was a supporter of your initiative in Newark with a lot of money, that's not the reason why you will not specifically, like Elizabeth Warren, say, break up that company?
There needs to be a lot of companies in America that are broken up, but it needs to be done in a sobered, systematic way.
Let's talk about Wall Street for a second. Jamie Dimon's the head of JP Morgan Chase. He put out a statement this year to shareholders and said that the tax cut was working. He supported the Trump tax cut. but he also said that the social needs of too many Americans are not being met. Is he part of the problem or part of the solution?
The rules of Wall Street, and again, I see things through the lens of an inner city, low-income community. The games that they played, the rig the system, hurt my community. It aggravated the racial wealth gap. And there's a lot of ire that I have for the way the rules have been written. And we have got to make sure that this economy is working for the ideals that we talk. That's why I passed a piece of legislation with Tim Scott across the aisle for opportunity zones. So we actually have a system now that's designed against building companies to last, that's being built to drive profits to people on Wall Street. And it's hurting, it's hollowing out. We're in Iowa, it's hollowing out communities like this and hurting what are, I think, basic capitalistic ideals.
Some of your colleagues in the race are for a wealth tax, Elizabeth Warren, for a financial transaction tax. You for those?
Look, I've said that we have a massive revenue problem in this country and we need to do things to bring more revenue in. So the first idea of a wealth tax, I don't agree with Elizabeth Warren's plan. I believe that we should tax capital gains as ordinary income. That's going to bring a tremendous amount of money. I think we need to raise marginal tax rates.
How high?
Look, that's something that's going to be negotiated, but they need to go up. And
is there a rate that you think is shouldn't go above that? 50%.
Of course, I would not go above 50%. Rolling back these toxic Trump tax cuts alone, to me, is important.
What about a transactions tax?
But hold on, because this is really important. We were sold this tax cut that is going to blow up our economy so much that it's going to pay for itself. We are now seeing under this president stunning levels of deficit spending that are going to get us to the point in a matter of years where our interest on debt is going to be more than our military budget. A transaction tax, that's not something that's in my plan. But what we have to start talking about is a system that's being designed in a very corrupt fashion.
You have a pretty aggressive plan to curb stock buybacks. Hasn't gone anywhere in the Congress, but it would make a significant change. Would you do anything about the widening ratio between CEO pay and average worker pay, which has exploded in the last couple of decades?
So a couple things. One is we know stock buybacks in the 80s, it was illegal. It was called stock manipulation. And we should start having conversations about the structural things that have changed our economy, that have concentrated power in the hands of the few and undermined the shared wealth and prosperity of a vibrant entrepreneurial society that values labor and the cost of labor. So these are larger conversations that we need to have. The incredible wealth disparities that we're seeing right now and the incentives we're giving CEOs on how to make money. Remember, we talked earlier, by incentivizing people towards quarterly earnings and not incentivizing to creating value, not value just for shareholders who might hold your stock for 10 minutes.
Right. Is that how you deal with CEO pay rather than direct regulation?
I think we've got to have a conversation about how to do that. I'm talking to some of the best economists that really are focused on the values that I'm focused on.
Don't have a plan now.
I don't have a plan now.
Yeah. Now you've got aggressive plans for baby bonds, which is designed to close the racial wealth gap, and also rental subsidies, which a lot of people on the left like it, would cost about $2 trillion over 10 years. Do you think that you need to pay for that? That's more than you could get by just rolling back the Bush tax cuts. Or do you subscribe to the idea that some Democrats have, which is they didn't pay for their tax cut, we don't need to pay for our stuff either? So deficits are overrated.
I'm not going to tell you deficits are overrated. I know too much about math to tell you that. And when you say I can't pay for it just by rolling back the Trump tax cuts, I can tell you from the estate tax to the Trump tax cuts to taxing order, I could give you the math on how we're going to do this. But I also want to challenge you, because this is what I get is please move to my neighborhood for 1 month and you will see how expensive poverty is to this country. We have a system that seems to be so much more comfortable with paying for the costs of poverty than making strategic investments on the front end that not only would save us taxpayer dollars, but would elevate human potential. And when you elevate human potential of children in my neighborhood in Newark, that genius, that's the most valuable natural resource any country has, because that genius could be inventors and artists that can trigger societies.
You've said on Medicare for All that you are going to be pragmatic and not go for the, not let the perfect stand in the way of the good. Same position on Green New Deal?
Well, look, we are a country that needs to have bold plans to solve our challenges. And the environment, I'm going to be a president that says, this is not an issue. This is how we're going to look at everything from our foreign policy and our trade deals and our foreign billions of dollars of foreign aid. This is how we're going to look at our ag bill. This is how we're going to look at our transportation, the Department of Transportation. Everything has to be done with an urgency for dealing with the planetary peril that we have, can actually grow our economy, create better jobs, and show this country, this planet, a model for how to deal with this problem.
You talked about the importance of unions. One of the big issues in the tech industry is the gig economy. Should workers in that economy be considered employees rather than contractors?
I think that we have to change. I mean, Uber drivers, I can go through the folks that are getting, I think, a raw deal, and we have got to make this new work. We have to view work in this country differently, and that means dealing with everything from portable benefits to how we're going to deal with requirement security, but even changing the understanding of what work is. And what we were talking about before with Jamie Dimon, I had this conversation with him where I went at him like, you know, a janitor, New York Times did this great article, a janitor that worked for Kodak versus a janitor that works for Apple. The janitor who worked for Kodak actually worked for Kodak, got the benefits, they got tuition assistance programs, retirement benefits, had dignity. They followed this woman in that article that worked up to middle management at Great American Story. The janitor that worked for Apple doesn't work for Apple anymore. Their wages have been suppressed, they don't have benefits, they don't have retirement security. That person can't go to school at night and rise. And so that's the unfair change in our economy. I bring up Jamie Dimon because I had that conversation with him. He actually hired back a lot of the people that work in his building because he was like, you're absolutely right. And so we cannot create a corporate culture that is anti-free market, anti-capitalist. That's what we're doing. You've got to create a system that promotes the kind of growth we're going to need in the future.